Hello and welcome back to Kidocracy at Large. I'm Siddhan Chandra and here every Saturday to speak about things kidocratic. What is Kidocracy? It's a declaration of the rule of minors and minorities. It is a revolutionary, optimistic, imaginative politics based on the 9 values of kidocratic education, which is led by minors and minorities aimed at adults and the majority. As in Fridays for Future, Black Lives Matter, Arab Spring, Occupy, and more recently, the farmers' strike in India. It's been 40 years since the publication of Midnight's Children, and Rushdie himself, the author, has seized the moment to address the current state of fascism in India. India's current midnight. Let me start off quickly by claiming that this novel is kidocratic. How so? More details in the future, but mainly it flies in the face of nationalism that is dividing not only India from its neighbors, but Indians from Indians. In an introduction, I co-wrote with Pradeep Sebastian to a book of essays on Indian fiction. We claimed the following. In Midnight's Children, the two adversarial characters, Salim and Shiva, represent respectively the fraying and crumbling nation and the simultaneous fascist attempt to keep it together. The novel is a master counter-narrative to Indian and Pakistani nationalisms, a seismic subcontinental movement in which families and bloodlines are thrown about with no hopes of cohesion, a testimony to the uncontainable liquefaction of life, spilling over and under arbitrary political lines drawn in the sand. Lines separating not only India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh, but also between Hindu and Muslim, rich and poor, the linguistically different, and exponentially diversifying populations of each of these nations. Partition, far from being an unfortunate historical event that people recovered from eventually, continues to be simultaneously coupled with the nationalist project, thereby wreaking havoc in perpetuity. That is, fascist politics of segregation and oppression continues within all these nations against minorities, whether religious, sexual, or economic. Midnight's Children spans 30 years, capturing the arc of hope that began with Freedom at Midnight in 1947, ending with the betrayal of that hope in the state of emergency that was imposed on India for 21 months between 1975 to 77. During the state of emergency, Indira Gandhi, the Prime Minister, imprisoned her opponents, curbed the press, and sterilized the poor of Delhi slums. But India today, nearly 45 years after the emergency, has entered a phase darker than before. And Rushdie describes it as follows. The horrifying escalation of assaults on women, the increasingly authoritarian character of the state, the unjustifiable arrests of people who dare to stand against that authoritarianism, the religious fanaticism, the rewriting of history to fit the narrative of those who want to transform India into a Hindu nationalist majoritarian state, and the popularity of the regime in spite of it all, or worse, perhaps because of it all. These things encourage a kind of despair. More to point, he goes on to ask a question that we Indians or South Asians or Asians or humans of this planet need to confront urgently. What is the relationship between society and the individual, between the macrocosm and the microcosm? To put it another way, do we make history or does it make or unmake us? Are we the masters or victims of our times? And answers as follows. Perhaps we are all handcuffed to history. And if so, then yes, history is our fault. History is the fluid, mutable, metamorphic consequence of our choices. And so the responsibility for it, even the moral responsibility, is ours. After all, if it's not ours, then whose is it? There's nobody else here. It's just us. So here we are. It is up to us to fix this mess. And we can. All that is needed is political will. Not at the top where there's plenty of it, but at the base, among the 99%. Rushdie sees hope in the student movements and the women's movement in India. And I would like to add the farmers' movement and the environmental Fridays for Future as a new front building against fascism in India. Building democratic muscle enough to force the hand of history does not happen overnight. Kidocracy aims to integrate the 99% towards controlling the 1% through sharing best practices. Towards that, I want to share what I learned from a documentary, Campus Rising, by Yusuf Saeed, in which he follows student politics between 2016 and 17 in a number of top universities in India. A number of humanities students offer a panoramic view of the growth of fascism since 2014, when Narendra Modi became the Prime Minister of India. They speak of the loss of freedom of expression through the sedition law and the repressions faced by minorities on campuses, like Dalits, formerly known as untouchables, Muslims, indigenous students, and women. What comes through is that 70 to 80% of the students are from minority groups, yet the faculty remains predominantly Brahmin and upper caste. Caste system survives through meritocracy, as when new students gather together to declare their ranks in their exams. I also learned that there is a nexus between police and right-wing goons. There is a defunding of humanities and emphasis on science subjects. And while science students tend to be right-wing, the humanities students are left-leaning. Defense budget has risen just as education has gotten privatized. Dalit student suicides, as with Rohit Vemula, and the disappearance of Najib Ahmed, are flashpoints for protests. And a student points out that even the establishment left is predominantly Brahmin, in denial of the diversity of the student body, which means a new left has to arise from below. Women students of Benares Hindu University complained of the segregation of men and women and the parading and shaming of couples to be made an example of. There is stringent curfews on women staying in hostels, and there is discrimination in the food served. There is no meat served for women, whereas there is meat served in the men's hostels. Women responded with Pinjra Tod, break the cage movement, protesting gender discrimination, and their artwork is refreshing. Signs and graffiti announce above 18 and not a virgin. Women enjoy sex too. Jamia loves gays. and Make Love, Use Protection. And there was Occupy UGC, a movement to protest the government scrapping the University Grants Commission scholarships for postgraduate students. Much has happened since this film in terms of student movements in India. The protests against occupation of Kashmir, the Citizenship Amendment Act, which was also anti-Muslim, and more recently, movements supporting the farmers' strike. I hope to return to this subject in the future, but for now, it is important to acknowledge that Modi's escalating fascism has made it absolutely necessary to prioritize popular anti-fascist education. Kidocratic education led from below, from the minors and the minorities. There is much to be learned from the successes of Black Lives Matter, and the climate clock is ticking. It is time to make history. Next week, I hope to speak of a documentary by Sabiha Sumar, a Pakistani filmmaker, who shows that the women and the poor of India and Pakistan have more in common than with the men and the rich of their own nations. Till then, bye.